We must launch a campaign to educate young Americans about the Middle East. And the way I'd like to begin that process is by addressing an open letter to Chapel Roan.
I'm just a singer, nothing crazy.
She's actually a great new recording artist who, like a Hezbollah pager, is really blowing up. In just a few months, she went from a struggling artist to getting 3 billion plays on Spotify, netting her almost 11 cents. She also said, I think it's important that people use critical thinking. I think it's important for me to question myself, question my algorithm, question, is some person that tweeted something about someone else even true? Preach, queer ally, preach. But then we get to Israel. And Chapel, this is where we must put to the test your pledge to use critical thinking and to question whether what you're reading on social media is true, because it isn't. There's a whole history of the Middle East that you and your fans aren't hearing about. So why don't you let me be your spirit guide through this? Before I do, let me tell you a little about myself, since you may have no idea who I am, considering that when this show went on the air, you were barely old enough to be told you were in the wrong body. My name is Bill Maher. I'm 35.
Lies, lies, and more lies.
Truth be told, I'm a baby boomer. I remember phone booths and cars with ashtrays and vaginal sex. I didn't learn about the Middle East from TikTok, which is a Chinese company whose totalitarian government would just love to have America's youth hating America. That's some of that algorithm stuff you say you want to look into.
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or psychological warfare. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. This is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans.
Now, first off, the fact that you don't know much history isn't your fault. You live in the United States, where the schools stopped doing that whole teaching facts thing a while ago. But getting all your history from TikTok is like getting all your calories from Hostess. I know you're moved by what you see on there. We all are, the dead Palestinian bodies. But it's odd that your generation didn't seem nearly as moved by the Jewish bodies on October 7th.
There's footage coming out of girls with their clothes ripped off and bloodied.
I'm ashamed as a woman that girls can have their bodies used as battlefields. I'm ashamed as a human being that we ignore their cries for help. Instead of denying responsibility, they boasted online of their ambition to destroy. Are these victims not worth the effort? Teenage girls are being in the street in front of their family. The perpetrators commit these crimes believing they will get away with it, and they have been right.
You killed at Coachella this year, but when Hamas kills at a music festival, it's a whole other thing. Doesn't the sight of so many young women raped at a music festival make it a little personal?
We also found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred during the 7th of October attacks in at least 3 locations, namely the Nova Music Festival site and its surroundings, Road 232, and Kibbutz Reim.
My guess is that Gen Z hearts are hardened by the propaganda you see on TikTok, which likes to call the Jews colonizers. But colonizers are intruders who have no history in an area, like when Spain conquered the Mayans. When the Dutch took over South Africa, they had no history to the land, they just wanted it. But Israel is the Jews' homeland, and Jews have always lived there, I cap you not. You can look it up. It's in this book called The Bible. The archaeology checks out. It says the Jews built a temple with a really big wall 7 centuries before Muhammad or Islam ever existed, and sure as shit, you can still go there and touch it. Calling Jews colonizers in Israel is like calling Native Americans colonizers here. It's ridiculous. But after World War II, and after the Jews were very nearly wiped out by an actual attempted genocide, they decided it was time for their historic homeland to be an actual country, so that for once they could defend themselves. And the UN, we like them, right? Yeah, they agreed and voted a country for each of the indigenous peoples. One side agreed to that. But the Arabs had a slightly different proposal. They said, how about we keep it all and wipe you out?
Israel's presence in the West Bank is a security measure that started in 1967, after the Six-Day War, when an urgent need for self-defense arose after waves of Arab terrorism from the region created an ongoing existential threat to Israeli citizens. Arab terrorism against Jews had been a reality since 1920, but until the Six-Day War, Jordan's occupation of the West Bank made Israeli security there impossible. After 1967, the scale and frequency of attacks continued to grow. In an attempt to end a Palestinian uprising, known as the First Intifada, the Oslo Accords, a set of agreements made from 1993 to 1995 between Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, gave Palestinian Arabs control over a significant portion of the West Bank under a newly formed Palestinian government, the Palestinian Authority. While there was a renewed hope among Israelis and Arabs that the Accords would usher in a definitive peace process, the negotiations fell apart and instead triggered the deadliest wave of terror Israel had ever seen, known as the Second Intifada in 2000.
Chapel, if you think it was repressive growing up queer in the Midwest, try the Mideast.
خداوند از این پدر دختر هست نمیکرد ما هیچ خرف نمیشیم که بچه هستیم نمیفهمم بسیار زیاد ناراحت حتی از بودن خود در دنیا دیگه پشیمان هستیم کاش هیچ نمی بودیم در دنیا اصلا به وجود نمیم ما به اندازه حیوان در ملت ارزش نداریم حیوانات خودشان میتونن سر بخود برن در رای خود ادامه بدن تا بخورن بنوشن ما اجازه شمیدن نداریم
15 countries in the Middle East, including Gaza, have laws that require women to obey their husbands. Laws. And those societies also have guardianship laws, which means a woman needs permission from her husband to work, to travel, to leave the house, to go to school, to get medical attention. Nothing? Honor killings, where women are murdered by their own fathers and or brothers, happen so frequently they can't even have an accurate account of how many. Countries practice female genital mutilation, and 650 million women alive today were married as children. Kids, if you really want to change the world and not just tie up Monday morning traffic, this is the apartheid that desperately needs your attention. Gender apartheid. Chapel, you're not wrong that oppression is bad, or that Palestinian and many other Muslim populations are oppressed and deserve to be freed. You just have it completely ass backwards as to who is doing the oppressing. Hamas is a terrorist mafia that took over Gaza. The Revolutionary Guard is a terrorist mafia that took over Iran. ISIS is a terrorist mafia that took over Iraq. The Taliban is a terrorist mafia that took over Afghanistan. These are the oppressors. And when you make it all about Israel, you take the pressure off of them. You enable them. The Iranian regime has killed 600 protesters after a 22-year-old woman died in police custody following her arrest for the crime of wearing her head covering incorrectly. Just to be clear, that's your team. Iran is who sponsors Hamas and Hezbollah. Are you sure this is who you want to throw down with? Meryl Streep spoke at the UN recently and said this about the Taliban, who are only slightly more conservative than your heroes in Hamas. She said, today in Kabul, a female cat has more freedoms than a woman. A cat may go sit on her front stoop and feel the sun on her face. She may chase a squirrel into the park. A squirrel has more rights than a girl in Afghanistan today. A bird may sing in Kabul, but a girl may not. You're a singer, and you're advocating for a place and a culture you would never want to live under. Gender may not be binary, but right and wrong kind of is.